Hey, Keith here with Rebel Civics. Welcome to Rebel Civics on the Unsafe Space Network. Hold on, I gotta turn off my audio. I don't need that echo. Sorry about that, folks. I'm driving myself today, producer and host. Um, Today, I want to talk about the so called holiday President's Day, which isn't actually the holiday. The federal holiday is Washington's birthday. Today, I celebrate Washington's birthday on President's Day on the week. It was Monday. The official holiday is celebrated on the third Monday of the month now, not on the actual day. Um, Contrary to popular belief, as I said, it's not President's Day. This is not a celebration of all presidents. That's not what the federal holiday is, even though that's what the media promotes it as. That's what the politicians promote it as. So I'm going to talk about that and why we shouldn't celebrate the holiday that's basically a king's holiday, celebration of the office. So I'm going to show one thing just to show you the federal holiday here. Um, the birthday, the official Congress, if you want to say Congress, can provide holidays. The congressional holiday was established as Washington's birthday. It was originally on his birthday, and it was changed a few decades ago to be on a Mondays when they did all the 3-day weekend holidays. Um, Somewhere along the way, it happened in the Democratic People's Republic of New Jersey, where when I was in government indoctrination camps, they started combining it with Lincoln's birthday in the celebration. So they used to call it President's Day when I was towards the end of grammar school and high school um, in New Jersey. So New Jersey does have a holiday called President's Day. So some states have a holiday called President's Day. I happen to be in Florida, which does not do that. Doesn't have Washington's birthday either. It's a federal holiday, so federal offices are closed. So what they were trying to do was conflate Lincoln with Washington. And at the time, I only knew about Lincoln, what they were telling me in school. Now I recognize Lincoln was, by my criteria, the worst president in U.S. history, based on my criteria of getting as more Americans killed by his actions than any other president and expanding the power of the federal government unconstitutionally. There's Lincoln. So Lincoln wins hands down on both of them. So no, I do not celebrate President Lincoln's birthday. George Washington, on the other hand, without him, we might not have had the original Union and might not have been able to kick the king out. He was a great president. He was also the president of the Constitutional Convention that wrote the Constitution. So, yes, Washington, for liberty-minded people, that's a birthday to celebrate. So the king's, in a monarchy, the king's birthday is a key holiday. Like, that's a very important holiday. You got to celebrate the king's holiday, the king's birthday. And that's where this President's Day comes from. They're really celebrating the office of the president. It's something appropriate for a monarchy. It's not appropriate for a liberty-minded people in a constitutional republic. This article here, it says, though it may be technically incorrect, the federal holiday is often colloquially referred to as President's Day. The Associated Press style book. Now, here's where a lot of this comes from. Most newspapers and some magazines use the form President's Day as an alternative rendering of Washington's birthday. Now, that's quite an alternate rendering. To do so completely changes what the holiday is. So confusion is because people make this crap up and they start calling it that. So but again, it could be a holiday. It could be a holiday in your state. If your kids go to government schools, they probably call it President's Day, and they discuss all the presidents, starting with Lincoln. But got to keep in mind, first off, as a practical matter, most presidents were horrible. At least a lot of them were horrible as a minimum. So I don't want to celebrate Joe Biden. Like, Joe Biden's birthday is not a day that an American who believes in freedom and liberty and limited government and no intervention wars should be celebrating. And just pick out your favorite of the worst. Obama, the so-called peace candidate, Nobel Peace Prize winner, who started more wars than any president in U.S. history. G.W. Bush, I'm not celebrating him. He's the one that started the whole Iraq War 1, 2, 3, and 4, however you want to call them. 20 years, couple $1 trillion, 2,500 dead Americans, tens of thousands of long-term injuries, cripples, and mental problems. Who knows how many people killed in the Middle East? I've seen numbers of talking about 1 million, large amounts of displaced people. And after 20 years of all that, the U.S. finally withdraws, realizing that they can't win without actually declaring war. The U.S. withdraws, and it takes a week for the Taliban to take over. So, no, I'm not celebrating either of the Bushes, G.W. Bush especially. Go back a little further, FDR. Don't expect me to celebrate communism and socialism. Woodrow Wilson, he's number 2 on my worst list. I'm not celebrating him. And then there's Lincoln. Anyway, I'll stop there with the list. But yeah, there's lots of reasons not to celebrate this holiday as President's Day. Insert your favorite of your worst presidents in your list for why not celebrate it. So I've been correcting people. Remember, if somebody says it's President's Day, say no, that's not the holiday. It's Washington's birthday. So so we're talking about the king, what a monarchy is. In a kingdom, in a monarchy, the king's birthday is the most important holiday. The peasants must celebrate the king's birthday. To call this holiday President's Day is akin to what I would call what a monarchy holiday is. And it's also a celebration of the office of the president, as if this is some revered high power, like what you'd call a king. To celebrate that office is to celebrate what's happened to it, what all presidents have done in the since Lincoln or even earlier. Lincoln certainly was a big kickoff of this process of expanding the power of the executive towards a monarchy. And that is what some people want. They want a monarchy. So, no, please don't celebrate President's Day. Please don't celebrate all the presidents. Think about who you're celebrating. Some of what George Washington did, and I briefly touched on, again, you all know the story that kicking the king out when the 13 colonies declared themselves free and independent states. They seceded from England, formed independent countries, call them that word now. Their states is the word that they used. But the king resisted that and tried to stop them. And George Washington was, without him, that might not have happened. He was a great general. When he became president, there was no campaigning involved. They said, George, will you do this? And he kind of reluctantly agreed. Then after 4 years, his campaign for the second term was some people from Congress went and talked to him, and they said, would you do this again? And he said, okay. And he went back to his farm. He never promoted himself, really, or he didn't go around campaigning. He didn't believe in that. He wasn't the member of any political party. He didn't believe in political parties. He thought that the factions would destroy the general government and the union. So he was opposed to that. So he was never part of a political party. And for his second term, basically, it was like because George was running, he got elected. But no, he didn't believe in any of that political process. And then when they tried to get him to do it a third time, he said, no, believe that 2 terms is sufficient. Want to retire from public life, and I want to go back and run my farm. And that established a tradition that presidents don't try to run, a third time. They don't go for 3 terms. That got in the 20th century, that ended. Somebody tried to do 4 terms, and then they established the 22nd Amendment, which is basically the limit that George Washington set a custom for, which is presidents and vice presidents are limited to 2 terms. So 22nd Amendment, many, many years later, 2 centuries later, really came out of George Washington's custom that he established, and then seeing what happened when FDR and when presidents tried to do more than 2 terms. The idea is we never wanted a kingdom. The founders did not want to establish a kingdom, and they didn't want a king. And George Washington, if he wanted, they might have been able to be the king. They might have made him king, but he was one of the big ones that was against it. So he's a great man. So I believe in celebrating Washington's birthday. That is what the holiday is called. So I'm going to stick to it. And I believe all liberty-minded people should celebrate Washington's birthday, but not all the presidents, and definitely not the office of the president, what it's become, nor king, as a worship of a monarchy. So I was going to bring up a couple things that Washington said from his farewell address. So this is a famous speech he originally wrote in 1796. So it was released on September 17, 1796, when he was leaving after his second term. So I'm just going to pick out a few things from this. It would take a long time to read it all. I'm going to post the link for this, though. This is worth a read. So if you've never read Washington's farewell address, it's filled with great warnings, great information. His positions on a whole bunch of things are good, on against the wars, against entanglements with foreign nations, warning against political factions, a whole bunch of stuff. The U.S. Senate on Washington's birthday, they read the whole speech aloud on the floor of the Senate. That's a tradition that's been done since Washington left, but they do that now. They read it. The vast majority of the senators, though, paid no attention to it. They do actually the exact opposite. So I highlighted a few things here. He starts out by saying, basically, I'm leaving. He appreciates that they wanted him to serve as the executive, and that he believes he needs to retire and let another citizen take over. I like these starts. He said, the period for a new election of a citizen to administer the executive government of the United States being not far distant. The time has actually arrived. It's good. He's pointing out the citizen. He did not think of the president or the office as this high power, kingly position, do anything, executive orders to do anything you want. The Obama line, I've got a pen and a phone, pretty cool, which is basically Obama's way of saying he was king. And effectively, a lot of people treat the president as king. The president's responsible for everything. The responsible president has to fix everything. The president runs the free world. He's the leader of the free world. That's not what the founders set up. George Washington would be rolling over his grave if he heard that sort of thing. That is not what he believed. So I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to pick out a few. And let me find this one. I highlighted one to start with in the second half. This is where he gets into the section about political factions. So George Washington wrote, the alternate domination of one faction over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge natural to party dissension, which in different ages and countries has perpetuated the most horrid enormities, is itself a frightful despotism. But this leads at length to a more formal and permanent despotism. The disorders and miseries which result gradually incline the minds of men to seek security and repose in the absolute power of an individual, and sooner or later the chief of some prevailing faction, more able and more fortunate than his competitors, turns this disposition into the purposes of his own elevation on the ruins of public liberty. Without looking forward to an extremity of this kind, which nevertheless ought not to be entirely out of sight, the common and continual mischiefs of the spirit of party are sufficient to make it the interest and duty of a wise people to discourage and restrain it. That's powerful writing here. He's saying avoid party power factions. So this whole sports game that's going on now with the blue team and the red team, and their hypocritical and inconsistent list of things that if you're red, you're on this, you do this, and if you're blue, you're on this. And the primary thing is to have the red guy in charge or the blue guy in charge, depending on which sports team you prefer. Washington very eloquently laid out why that's a horrible thing. And he's right. It's a frightful despotism. Talks about ill-found jealousies and false alarms kindles the animosity of one part against another, foments occasional riot and insurrection, opens the door to foreign influence and corruption, which find a facilitated access to the government itself through the channels of party passions. Thus, the policy and will of one country are subjected to the policy and will of another. How'd George Washington know about Ukraine? This whole section's great. I won't read the whole thing. But he did talk about the parties in a free country are useful checks upon the administration of government, serve to keep alive the spirit of liberty. Boy, we should all miss when we have presidents that would think this and say this and could write this down and make a speech like this. It's almost it's in the if I didn't laugh I would cry category. You think about Joe Biden writing something like this. I'm going to read another section here, and pardon me while I find it. As a very important source of strength and security, cherish public credit. One method of preserving it is to use it as sparingly as possible. As sparingly as possible. That's another one. Laugh if you don't cry. Laugh or you'd cry. Use it as sparingly as possible, avoiding occasions of expense by cultivating peace. Don't go to war. You don't need as much money. Listen to Ron Paul's speech at the anti-war rally this week in D.C. That's a key point he made. End the Fed. If you ended the Fed, it would end these wars, all these foreign intervention wars of the biggest empire in Earth's history, the United States government. Without the Fed printing money, without credit, they wouldn't be able to conduct these sort of wars. So Ron Paul brought that up as a way to, if you're for anti-war, just end the Fed. That helps a lot. Anyway, one method of preserving it is to use it as sparingly as possible, avoiding occasions of expense by cultivating peace, but remembering also that timely disbursements to prepare for danger frequently prevent much greater disbursements to repel it, avoiding likewise the accumulation of debt, not only by shunning occasions of expense, but by vigorous exertions in time of peace to discharge the debts. Stop there for a second. There's something we don't do. The debt has just been rising and rising since Woodrow Wilson's time. And earlier. In peace, George Washington is saying vigorously discharge the debt. They don't. We're not in peace, or they're not interested in discharging the debt, or both. I think it's both. Which unavoidable wars may have occasioned. Now the last unavoidable war, I would say, is probably the War of 1812. Some people might argue the World Wars, but my view on that is that the United States could have done differently prior to World War I, not have entered World War I. World War I would have ended in a kind of a stalemate, and Hitler would have never risen to power, and World War II would have never happened. That's a possible outcome. Either way, I'll get into the section a little later where George Washington warns about entangling alliances. So he says, by vigorous exertions in time of peace to discharge the debt, which unavoidable wars may have occasioned. Say the War for American Independence, maybe and the War for 1812. Not ungenerously throwing upon posterity the burden, I think it means, which we ourselves ought to bear. So what he's saying here is that borrowing from future generations to pay for wars today and goodies and handouts, that's a burden that we ourselves ought to bear. The current generation should pay for the current generation's wars, not the next generation, which is what Congress does and the presidents do. The Ukraine war is going to be paid for by our grandchildren if the dollar survives long enough for them to do it. The country doesn't go bankrupt. The execution of these maxims belongs to your representatives, but it is necessary the public opinion should cooperate. To facilitate to them the performance of their duty, it is essential that you should practically bear in mind that towards the payment of debts, there must be revenue. In other words, if you're going to incur debt as a government, you need to fund that. It has to be revenue. That to have revenue, there must be taxes, that no taxes can be devised which are not more or less inconvenient and unpleasant, that the intrinsic embarrassment inseparable from the selection of proper objects, which is always a choice of difficulties, ought to be a decisive motive for a candid construction of the conduct of the government in making it, and for a spirit of acquiescence in the measures for obtaining revenue, which the public exigencies may at time dictate. That's a powerful warning here about debt. The next section I'm just going to read here. This is observe good faith and justice towards all nations, cultivate peace and harmony with all. Religion and morality enjoin this conduct, and it can be that good policy does not equally enjoin it. It will be worthy of a free, enlightened, and at no distant period great nation. He's saying that cultivate peace and harmony. That's what the experiment is about, and that's George's advice. Next paragraph here. In the execution of such a plan, this is to cultivate peace and harmony, nothing is more essential than the permanent, inveterate antipathies against particular nations and passionate attachments for others should be excluded, and that in place of them, just and amicable feelings towards all should be cultivated. George is saying stay away from antipathies against particular nations and stay away from passionate attachments to others. Basically, be neutral. The nation which indulges towards another an habitual hatred or habitual fondness is in some degree a slave. Y'all feel like tax slaves? It is a slave to the animosity or to its infection, either of which is sufficient to lead it astray from its duty and its interest. Antipathy in one nation against another disposes each more readily to offer insult and injury, to lay hold of slight causes of umbrage, to be haughty and intractable when accidental or trifling occasions of dispute occur. Ukraine. Hence, frequent collisions, obstinate, envenomed, and bloody contests. The nation, prompted by ill will and resentment, sometimes impels to war the government, contrary to the best calculations of policy. The government sometimes participates in the national propensity and adopts through passion what reason would reject at other times. It makes the animosity of the nation subservient to projects of hostility instigated by pride, ambition, and other sinister and pernicious motives. The peace often, sometimes perhaps the liberty of nations has been the victim. So likewise, a passionate attachment of one nation for another produces a variety of evils. Sympathy for the favorite nation, facilitating the illusion of an imaginary common interest, imaginary, in cases where no real common interest exists, and infusing into one the enmities of the other, betrays the former into participation in the quarrels and wars of the latter without adequate inducement or justification, leads to concessions of the favorite nation of privileges denied to others, which is apt doubly to injure the nation making the concessions. So I won't finish this whole I won't read the whole section to you. I really advise just sit down and read this all the way through. Also, I found I'm going to post a link for an audio version of it so you can listen to it. So I'll put both those links in the show notes. This last section, I'm going to read of this, and then I'll stop reading. This is a great one. Europe has a set of primary interests which to us have none or very remote relation. Hence, she must be engaged in frequent controversies, the causes of which are essentially foreign to our concerns. Hence, therefore, it must be unwise in us to implicate ourselves by artificial ties in the ordinary vicissitudes of our politics, or the ordinary combinations and collisions of our friendships or enmities. This paragraph right here, I really wish Washington, D.C., when they read this every year on the floor of the Senate, they paid attention to this. Great advice. We got to get out of Ukraine and Russia's conflict. Russia is not a threat to the United States if we're not a threat to them. We're messing with the biggest nuclear power in the world, and they're doing their best to start World War III. George Washington's advice was to not do this. So there's no doubt in my mind, if George Washington was here today and saw the situation in Ukraine with Russia, he would say, don't get involved. Stay away. That is not going to end well. Anyway, that's all I wanted to talk about. I'm going to keep this a short episode, keep this down to half an hour. It's not President's Day. It's Washington's birthday. George Washington is a guy we're celebrating. Washington's birthday, that's a good holiday. I'll have a toast to George Washington and thank him for what he did to create our union and the founding documents of the Constitution, and establish many precedents about how a president was supposed to act. It's nothing like what the current president is doing right now. Total opposite. So just keep in mind, folks, it's not President's Day. It's Washington's birthday. All right. Thanks for watching Rebel Civics, and I'll see you next week.
This production was made possible through the generous support of our members. To join our community, visit unsafespace.com. Unsafe Space is an online publication for individualists interested in subverting authoritarianism and ushering in the next Enlightenment. For biting analysis and nourishing composition, or to sign up for our weekly news brief, The Abstract, visit unsafespace.com. Thanks for joining us today.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. The content of this production has not been authorized for distribution on Apple devices. The following co-conspirators are hereby uninvited to Klaus Schwab's Winter Solstice Party. Please be advised that CBS News has paused activity on Unsafe Space while it continues to assess security. Central bank digital currency is a safe and secure way to protect you from Sam Bankman-Fried. If you think about it, no one should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. Science, scientific, and scientifically are registered trademarks of the World Economic Forum. Unauthorized use is prohibited. Computer voice courtesy. Never mind, that last line is misinformation. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.